There are children. And when you look into their eyes, you no longer see a child. You see a doorway. Not a door to a room or a house, but a door so ancient. One that opens to a place where time doesn't exist. Those eyes don't belong to playgrounds, classrooms, or cozy homes. They are eyes that have witnessed the fall of empires, heard promises never kept, and walked through winters so long they've been erased from history. You don't ask that child, "How old are you?" Because something in you knows. If they were to tell the truth, you wouldn't be able to bear it. You'd feel yourself shrink. Small, confused, lost. Those eyes don't sparkle. They're not happy. They're not sad. They're mirrors, reflecting an age the world has long forgotten. They're like a candle burning in a room full of wind, still lit even if flickering. Have you ever seen eyes like that? On a crowded bus, in a noisy schoolyard, or staring back at you from the mirror when you look long enough into your own. They make you pause, not out of fear, but because something ancient in you begins to ache. It's like a bell tolling in a temple sealed for 1,000 years, and your soul is the only one who hears it. You don't know why. You just know. You've touched something you can't name. Not knowledge, not emotion, but memory. A memory that doesn't come from your mind, but rises from your spine in a silent shiver. And you know, from that moment on, your life will never be the same again. You were once that child, not a prodigy, not someone special. You just had lived too many lives, long before anyone ever taught you how to live your first. While others played and dreamed, you sat quietly, carrying a sadness you couldn't name. You didn't know why you were tired, when nothing had even begun. You didn't know why tears would fall, for no reason at all. You saw others chase the lights, but your soul kept watching the shadows. You felt like a guest at a party you didn't remember agreeing to attend. The laughter around you felt out of sync, and joy always seemed just a little too loud. The adults said you were too mature. Your friends teased, calling you a little old man. Your teachers worried you weren't adjusting well. And little by little, you started to believe something must be wrong with you. But maybe you weren't lost. Maybe you had simply returned from somewhere deeper. A place your soul had once lived, once understood, once shattered, and once resurrected. You didn't learn what others had to know. You remembered it. You weren't advanced. You just had walked a few lifetimes ahead. You carried scars no one could see, understood truths no one had taught, and felt things no one believed were real. So you learned to stay quiet. Not because you were afraid to speak, but because no one was still enough to hear. You lived like a translator of the soul's language, in a world that only reads what's printed on the surface. But there's one truth no one can take from you. You woke up earlier, and sometimes the one who wakes up first is the loneliest one. In the very first morning light, there's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, duty, or age. It comes from pretending not to know. What, deep down, you've known for a very long time. You once smiled when someone said, "Life is a joyful journey." But you could feel the emptiness behind their grin. A soul bracing itself not to collapse. You nodded when people spoke of success and ambition, but you could sense the quiet fear of failure, hiding beneath each breath they tried to control. You saw it. Even if they walked fast, their hearts were moving backwards. You never tried to understand people. You just saw. You saw too soon. You saw too clearly. You saw so deeply. You simply couldn't unsee it. There are truths that, if spoken too early, don't enlighten. They wound. And you knew that. No one taught you. It's just that, in your eyes, there's a memory of having once spoken too soon and losing people who weren't ready to understand. So you learned how to see without speaking, You began living as if walking through a transparent world, where everything is clear, but you have to pretend you're blind. You once tried to tell someone, but their eyes darted away, their smile tightened awkwardly, and you realized, not everyone is ready for what's real. So you kept it, not because you didn't want to share, but because you honored the pace of every soul's becoming. You understood, no one awakens before they're ready, but your eyes, they still see, deeply, as if, inside them, an old soul is sitting quietly in meditation, waiting for someone still enough to turn inward and finally see themselves. You don't need more knowledge, no certifications, no validation. What you truly need is a moment, a gaze, not one that glances over you, but one that sees right through you, one that doesn't ask, "How old are you?" but instead asks, "How many lives have you lived?" Maybe no one's ever asked you that. So now, let me be the first to ask you softly and deeply, where did you live before you became who you are today? Before you learned a language, before you had a name, before even your first memory in this life? Did you ever breathe in another dimension? Have you ever found yourself walking and suddenly a strange image flickers in your mind? A forest, a house that once burned, a pair of eyes that once wept for you. Though you've never met them, and then your heart clenches as if mourning something lost long, long ago. No one understands. No one mentions it. But you know, and your heart sinks because of a memory with no name. That's when your soul begins to speak. And not in words, not in sharp images, but in a shiver running quietly up your spine. A strange stillness when you catch your reflection. A held breath. When a distant melody plays and feels too familiar. You don't need anyone to prove it's real. You only need to be still enough to listen to yourself. Maybe you don't need to find yourself in faraway places. Not in the Himalayas, not in ancient scriptures, not in the teachings of someone else, but in your own eyes, the only thing that has followed you through every lifetime. Try looking into them and whisper, "Who was I before the world taught me how to become me?" There is a strange kind of loneliness, not from being alone, but from realizing no one around you is living at the same depth as you. You remember sitting in class, watching the teacher lecture with passion, and knowing deep down, you weren't learning. You were remembering. The concepts weren't new. They were simply echoing from a memory. Buried somewhere deeper, you heard people speak of love, of sacrifice, of forgiveness, and something inside you quietly smiled. These aren't things we learn, you thought. They've always been here. You never knew how or why you knew. No one ever taught you that. Love doesn't imprison, compassion doesn't ask for applause, and truth doesn't need to win arguments. But still, you knew, in a way no one could explain. And yet, that knowing came with a cost. You started to feel different. You had to play along. Pretend to be surprised when you have already seen things coming. Pretend to be awakened when that light had always been with you. And then came the doubt. Am I just imagining all this? Does anyone else feel the same way? Has anyone else ever remembered like I do? You didn't want to be the outsider, so you learned how to blend in. You tried to forget what you already knew, just to avoid unsettling those around you. You smiled when you didn't want to. You nodded along when your spirit whispered no. You stayed silent. When the truth is in your throat felt too heavy for others to bear. But at night, you heard it again. Your voice, whispering, "I remember something. No one else remembers." And in that quiet moment, you realized, remembering early is not a gift. It is a calling. to be the light before anyone knows they're standing in the dark. You once tried to live shallow, just like the world taught you to, smiling just enough, feeling sad at the appropriate time, caring about what others cared about, saying what was acceptable, hiding what was too real. You tried to be normal, like a stone drifting along the river's current. You tried saying what people wanted to hear, tried laughing at things that weren't funny, tried calling love an ideal, even though deep inside, you knew it was freedom. But each time you pretended not to see, you stepped a little further away from yourself. Each time you smiled to fit in, your heart shrank a little, like a child being taught, "Don't feel too much. People don't like that." You loved, like they did, fast, intense, clingy, demanding. But your soul didn't resonate that way. To you, love was a quiet presence. No control, no cages, just, "I'm here when you need me." But loving like that made you feel too hard to understand. You once chased goals, deadlines, checklists of success. But the more you followed them, the more hollow you felt. The more you achieve, the further you drifted from what truly mattered. Because deep within, a voice kept whispering, "This isn't why I came here." You weren't lazy. You weren't lost. You hadn't given up. You just couldn't keep attaching yourself to a world built for souls that had never broken before. You didn't hate this world. You just found it too loud. For a soul longing for stillness. Too fast. For someone who had learned to listen to the slow rhythm within. And you realized, this is the tragedy of being too deep in a shallow world. You knew too early. You understood too much. And you stayed silent for far too long. But maybe silence was how you became a spring, not just another drop lost in the rushing sea of people. There's a perilous moment on the journey of deep souls. It's not when you're lonely. It's not when you're misunderstood. It's when you begin to doubt the truth within yourself. You start thinking, maybe I'm just too sensitive. Maybe I overthink everything. Maybe I just don't belong in this life. No one points a finger to deny you, but they deny you in quieter ways, in the way they don't listen, in the way their eyes look away, when you try to share something honest, in the polite smiles, when you open up about something real, in the soft, empty, right when you've reached your deepest truth. You don't blame them. You just start to wonder, am I making this harder than it needs to be? Am I living wrong? Maybe. I should be simpler, like everyone else, just to breathe easier. So you try. You try to forget what you know so deeply inside. You try to say things. That's easier to hear. You try to believe everything is fine, even when something in you knows it isn't. You start wearing a mask, not to lie, but to protect yourself. But the truth within you, it doesn't die. It just waits. Waits for stillness. Waits for a single pair of eyes that truly see you. Waits for the moment you finally stop trying. To fit into a world that never felt like home. And then, one night, in the middle of a crowd, you hear your soul echo, like a voice calling through a hollow cave. I've known this, long before anyone explained it. I saw that, before anyone gave it a name. I'm not wrong. I just remembered, too early. And maybe you'll cry, not out of sadness, but because finally, you're no longer denying yourself. You once believed you were the one left behind, but maybe the truth is the exact opposite. You're not lost, you're just ahead. You were the first to stop when everyone else kept running, the first to ask why, while the whole world chanted, "Keep going." The first to breathe slowly, in a time that worships speed, and because you're ahead, you don't see anyone beside you. No one confirms your path, no one shares a map, no one is quiet enough to listen to the stories your soul carries in silence. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It simply means You're the first light to pass through a dark forest. You didn't come here to blend in by forgetting who you are. You came to hold the flame in a village that forgot how to keep the fire alive. You're not a soul that's more special. You're simply someone who remembered earlier. You don't need to say everything you know. You just need to live it. So that one day, when someone happens to look into your eyes, they might see themselves in a version they've forgotten. Because sometimes your quiet presence alone, it is already calling another soul home. You once thought you were alone, but maybe you're the one opening the door for those who come after. And they will come, not to admire you, but to recognize themselves in the truth you've been living. You don't need to shout to be understood. You don't need to convince anyone to accept you. You just need to keep walking with a heart that stays open, because a small light walking long enough through a deep forest, it will eventually become a path. And if you're watching this video now, maybe it's because your soul has heard the invitation. From a memory too old for words, a meeting that never needed sound, a recognition beyond the eyes, a silent nod between two souls. I still remember. I'm still here, and I'm still walking. You're not alone. You're just a few steps ahead so that others can find their way home. One day, you pass a stranger on the street, and suddenly your heart pounds like you've just touched electricity. It's not because they're beautiful. It's not because they're familiar. It's because something deep inside you suddenly knows. I've known this person in a place that has no name. You can't label the feeling. You have no proof. But every cell in your body whispers, this isn't the first time we've met. Then you travel to a place you've never been, and everything inside you feels strangely at peace. You know the path, as if you've walked it before. You know the corners, the way the light falls, even the scent in the air. You stand in a new world, but your soul feels like it's come home. And then the dreams begin. Not fleeting, scattered dreams, but layered, vivid dreams, like scenes from a film that's been continuing without you. Sometimes it's war, sometimes ancient stone staircases, sometimes just a pair of eyes watching you through the mist, saying nothing, but understanding everything. You wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, not from fear, but from the haunting familiarity. You know you've lived somewhere else, been someone else, loved someone who no longer exists in this world, carried a sorrow that was never spoken aloud. You no longer sleep just to rest. You begin to wait for sleep, like a doorway back to the place your soul once called home. And then the numbers begin. 1111, 222, 333, 444. At first, you think it's just a coincidence, but slowly, you can't unsee it anymore. Each number arrives with the same quiet feeling. Pay attention. Something is awakening within. You begin to search for recurring dreams, for past life memories, for intuition, for timelines. You try to explain it all. But then, in a moment of stillness, you hear a voice without words. You're not crazy. You're remembering. You're not dreaming. You're returning. And in that moment, you understand. Awakening doesn't begin with a loud bell. It begins with a soft vibration, a quiet feeling. You can no longer hide. You begin dreaming of the same scene again and again. Not the same, but something keeps coming back. A long hallway shrouded in mist, a door no one ever opens, a cracked mirror in the dark, a gaze watching you from across the hill, silent, aching. The first time, you think it's random. By the third time, you begin to feel something is continuing. By the seventh, you realize each dream is another chapter in a journey that never ended. Each time you dream, you go a little further. You meet someone new, but they feel too familiar. You touch an object, and your whole body shudders. You hear a voice whisper in sleep. You've been here before. No one around you understands. You can't explain it, because no language is vast enough to describe it, but your soul knows. Knows that these aren't just dreams, but a form of memory, returning through the door of the unconscious. And then, you start noticing something else. Your dreams repeat something with quiet insistence. Symbols. A clock frozen at 3:33. A book with no words. A river that flows backward. A nameless map. A pair of glowing hands in the dark. You can't explain them logically, but your heart knows. Something is calling me, through images. That's when you touch a truth. No one teaches in school. Symbols are the original language of the soul. They don't need translation. They don't need an explanation. They only need to be felt. And you'll remember. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Those symbols, they are maps, clues your soul left behind from another life, so you could follow them and return to yourself. Not every dream is pleasant. Some wake you with tears in your eyes. Some jolt you awake in the night. A scream caught in silence. But you're not afraid like before, because now you understand. They're not nightmares. They're messages sent backward from the past. Dreams are no longer an escape. They've become a meeting place where your soul greets you night after night. And sometimes, just before you wake, you hear a soft voice say, "We are still here. We never left. You just forgot." You open your eyes. But in your heart, the images from the night remain. A glowing map, a half-seen face, a door slightly open, and someone waiting for you to walk through. You used to be someone who needed a reason. You analyzed, researched, and broke down every little thing. You used to believe every right decision must come from logic. But then, you started noticing something strange. You knew, before you had time to think. You'd walk out of a room, and minutes later, something you never wanted happens inside. You'd skip a meeting, and months later you understand the pain you avoided. No one told you. There was no proof, no logical clue, but your soul tilted ever so slightly, and you just knew. You knew, I have to go this way, even if no one agrees. That person isn't well, even though they're smiling. That opportunity isn't mine, even though it looks perfect on paper. You couldn't explain. You only felt it, as a kind of quiet certainty inside, a stillness that said, "This is the truth." That's intuition. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It's just a gentle tilt of the soul. Intuition is the voice of the soul, speaking not in words but in frequencies. And then the isolation begins. No one understands why you'd turn down a great job. Why would you walk away, right when things seemed stable? Why would you leave relationships that looked so promising? And when you say, "I just felt it," they look at you like you're dreaming too much. But you stop trying to convince anyone. You no longer need them to understand your intuition. You just know, if I don't follow it, I betray myself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you know now, it's not reason guiding you home, it's intuition. You begin choosing differently, not based on what makes sense, but based on what calls your name. You walk more slowly, quieter, but deeper. Your presence changes. No more frantic energy. No more needing to be right. No more trying to explain yourself. You don't have to understand everything to be on the right path. You just need to listen enough to recognize the call. When your intuition comes alive, you stop asking, "What should I do next?" and instead ask, "Does this make my heart hum? Is there a part of me quietly nodding? Do I see even a flicker of light in this direction?" And then you look back. At all times, you betrayed your intuition for logic. All the times you forced yourself into a plan, only to find yourself far from who you are. Now, you don't want to run anymore. You don't need a map, because you remember how to read the stars of your soul's night sky. You walk step by step, guided by the faint knock of something ancient and deep within. And finally, you realize, intuition doesn't need to defeat logic. It just needs to be trusted long enough to lead you home. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and in a fleeting moment seen someone else looking back at you? Not your past self, not the future version people talk about in books, but someone ancient. A gaze without judgment, no blame, just looking quietly, deeply. You flinch, you turn away, because you're not ready to remember. Maybe I was someone else before I became this me. You start to notice the strange stillness within yourself, a calmness you never learned from anyone, a kind of ease that didn't come from any skill, just a quiet sense. I've been through this before, a long, long time ago. In your most silent nights, you hear a whisper without sound. I'm still here. I never left. I've just been waiting for you to remember. You ask, who is that? A memory? A past life? Another version of me? And then you understand. The name doesn't matter. What matters is you felt their presence, a presence that lives beyond language, unhurried, undemanding, but deeply, undeniably real. That being may have lived through war without losing faith, may have lost loved ones and still chosen love, may have been betrayed but still opened their heart. That self wasn't perfect, but it was whole. Not because they never fell, but because they rose again and again without hardening. You don't hear them speak. You simply see that gaze, illuminating all the dim corners within you. You touch your pain without shrinking. You breathe through your doubts without needing to fix them. You live with the question without rushing toward an answer. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." And in this very moment, you realize you are touching a part of your heart that has been asleep for too long. No need to awaken your kundalini, no need to activate the 12th chakra. You only need to sit and admit to yourself, I've wandered far from myself, but now I'm coming back. You don't need to do anything grand. Just live a little more honestly, a little more gently, be a little kinder to the one who lives inside your skin, and then you begin to see. That being said, it has never left. They've always been here, in your recurring dreams, in the eyes of strangers that feels too familiar, in the heartbeat that stumbles when you meet someone you somehow already know. From that moment on, you no longer want to become someone else. You just want to return to the one you've always been. The one you were before the world taught you how to be someone else. You slow down, not because you're tired, but because you know every deep breath is a touch of the soul. Every quiet moment is a piece of remembering. Every act of forgiveness is a step closer to home. There comes a strange moment. No bells, no dramatic, spiritual event, no thunder or flashes of light like in the movies. Just a quiet breaking, clear, still, real. You might be sitting at a cafe or walking through a late afternoon or waking from a dream that keeps returning. And suddenly, all the scattered pieces within you start to click into place, not through logic, but through a deep knowing in your bones. I've just remembered something I can never unremember. You remember that you chose to come to Earth not by accident, not because you were lost, but because you made a promise. A promise without words, without sound. Just a soul agreement. I will go to remember, to carry the flame, to help others come home. You don't remember every lifetime. You don't remember every face. You don't have evidence to prove it. But you remember the feeling, clearly. This isn't my first time. I've restarted this journey again and again. And this time, I won't forget. You cry, not from weakness, but because, for the first time in your life, you feel strong, without needing to pretend. You feel that you've lived through enough pain, wandered far enough, broken deeply enough, to finally touch something the world never taught you, but your soul never forgot. How many times have I died, and still come back with love? How many lifetimes have I crumbled, yet my heart never closed? And you realize you've crossed a threshold, not of knowledge, not of status, but the threshold where you can no longer turn away from who you truly are. From that moment on, everything outside stays the same, but inside, you are forever different. You begin to look at others differently, no longer trying to awaken them, no more urgency to fix or develop them, just love. For those who are still remembering slowly, you no longer need to preach, you just need to be. You walk more softly, not because you've figured it all out, but because you no longer need to prove that you have. The noise no longer pulls you, no longer swept up by the endless self-help trends. You just step back and watch, then smile and say, "Ah, they're on their journey too. I've been there. Now, I just keep the flame." You become a light keeper, not loud, not forceful, not a teacher, just someone living in truth and letting their light speak for itself. You speak less, but deeper. You smile more slowly, but more sincerely. You no longer live to be seen. You live because you've remembered. And you understand, awakening is not an event. It's not a certificate or a level. It's a return, a quiet nod to your soul. And once you remember deeply enough, you no longer ask, "What's the meaning of life?" Because now you've begun to live from the very meaning itself. Have you ever felt this way? You hear a song just in passing, and your heart tightens. You don't know why. There's no clear memory attached to it, no story you can tell. Just something inside you is struck, as if it touched a layer of memory you can't name. Or you see a symbol, a flame, an eye, a feather falling at the exact right moment, and your whole body shivers, as if your soul just stood up. That's not recalling. It's not the kind of memory that says, "Oh, I've seen that before." It's something else. It's a deep, non-verbal knowing. A kind of recognition that doesn't come in images, but in waves, in vibrations, in a knowing that doesn't require thought. You don't think about it. You just know, in an undeniable way, but hard to explain. Carl Jung called these archetypes, living symbols that exist in the collective unconscious. No one created them. No one owns them. But when you come across the symbol that belongs to your soul, you resonate, as if meeting something sacred, yet deeply familiar. Have you noticed? Those with healing energy often feel drawn to glowing hands, leaves and forests, flowing water, light radiating from the chest. Those who once walked the path of esoteric knowledge, they are often captivated by ancient scrolls, spirals, stone gates, eyes looking back from mirrors. You don't know why. You just know. It calls you, and each time you follow it, you're taking one more step on a soul map you once drew in a memory too deep for words. This is no longer conventional knowledge. You begin to see the difference between what you've been taught and what has always been inside you, but it is just now waking up. Soul memories are seeds. They don't need to be watered. They're simply waiting for your stillness to start growing. And then you realize you no longer need to learn more. You just need to listen deeper. You begin choosing books, not because they're popular, but because they vibrate at your frequency. You choose people to walk with, not because they're accomplished, but because they help you remember who you are. You stop chasing right versus wrong. You begin choosing resonance. And the most beautiful part? You don't need to explain it. You don't need to prove what you feel. You no longer need anyone to believe in your path, because you believe in it. And the deepest kind of belief. It is the one that asks for no reason at all. From there, you begin to live in a realm of knowing with no name, not intellect, not information, but something quieter, deeper. A space where you stop trying to know and simply begin to remember. And sometimes, in just a single breath, when you pause and listen and fall still, you'll hear something whisper inside you. We already knew this. Now, we're simply remembering. You used to think your true self was something extraordinary, a version of you that you were always striving to become, always awakened, always wise, always right, never angry, never broken, never wrong. You imagined it as a state you'd someday reach after healing enough wounds, surviving enough pain, passing enough tests. But then, you realized, there is no someday. There is only right here, with a version of you that is simply real. That self isn't perfect, but it's real. It's the one who has shattered and still chooses to stay open. The one who has burned with anger, but never lost compassion. The one who lost their way, but never gave up on returning. That self doesn't need to be elevated, doesn't need to shine, doesn't need a grand awakening, because they've become real enough to stop proving who they are. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And maybe you've been doing that all along. You've sat in a room, facing versions of yourself you were once ashamed of. You've cried in the middle of the night, realizing how far you'd strayed, how much you'd hurt others, how deeply you had abandoned yourself. You've walked with bleeding feet, but still chose not to turn to stone. You've looked your mistakes in the eye and didn't flinch. You've faced your shadows and didn't run. That's when your true self began to show. Not like a movie's awakened character, but like an old friend from deep inside, sitting quietly beside you, placing a hand on your heart, and wordlessly saying, "I've been here all along. I never left. You just became soft enough to let me in." Your true self doesn't need you to be pure. It only needs you to be honest. Honest to your bones, even about the things that are hard to admit. Jealousy, weakness, control, fragility. You used to think, maybe I'm not spiritual enough if I still feel anger, sadness, and sensitivity. But no, to feel anger makes you human. To hold that anger with love makes you soulful. And you're doing that. You don't need to be always positive. You just need to be real enough to know when you're pretending. Your true self isn't on a mountaintop. It's not glowing in a golden aura of enlightenment. It's in every moment you. Don't run from your sadness. Don't defend your mistakes. Don't shapeshift to be accepted. That self, yes, that one, can stand in panic without judgment. It can fail without tearing itself apart, can be wrong without carrying a lifetime of shame, because it has learned what it needed to know. And once you begin living from that place, you stop asking, "How do I become my best self?" And you start asking, "How can I be more honest with myself right now?" From there, everything begins to shift. Quietly, you laugh slower, you breathe deeper, you show up more fully, not for anyone to see, but because you've finally come home to yourself. Your true self isn't a destination, it's a center point. Between all your lived experiences, between the parts of you that were bright and those that were dark, between pride and humility, between ideals and wounds, between every rise and every collapse, And maybe, if you're still here listening, it means you're ready to stop chasing some perfected self and start returning to the one you've always been. No costumes, no high vibration glow, just a heart that's still open and an inner gaze soft enough to hold every imperfect piece of you. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be real. You once believed the journey of awakening was a long and arduous path. You imagined there would be staircases to climb, levels of consciousness to rise through, a mountaintop of light where one day you'd finally be worthy. You read books, listened to podcasts, meditated, you studied frequencies, energy, chakras, the Akashic field. And yet, the further you went, the more it felt like you were never getting there. Until one day, in the middle of a crowd, at a bus stop, on an ordinary morning, you stopped. Not because you were tired, not because you were lost, but because suddenly you felt enough. You heard the wind, you saw a leaf fall, you felt your heartbeat, and nothing remarkable was happening. And yet, you dropped into something deep. You didn't awaken because you learned something new. You awakened because you released what wasn't real. You let go of needing to understand everything. Let go of trying to be better, higher, more special. Let go of the fear that you're falling behind, and you returned. Returned where? Right here, to the place you've always been, but rarely ever fully occupied. In this very moment, in this very breath, in this body, the one you've never truly paused long enough to be inside. Awakening, it turns out. It isn't loud. It's not cinematic. It's not as mystical as people describe. It's quiet, soft, close. Eckhart Tolle once said, "Awakening is not changing who you are, but discarding who you are not." From that moment on, you no longer chase the light. You simply stay still long enough for the dust to fall from the light that's always been there. You stop clinging to the image of a high-frequency version of yourself. You begin to see the sacrifice in simple things: a single drop of water, a gentle greeting, a deep, dreamless sleep. You stop trying to ascend to 5D. You simply step back far enough to see who you were before the world told you who to be. And in that stepping back, everything goes quiet. Not quiet because it ends, quiet because it returns. You no longer need more knowledge. You need a pause, a still point. You stop asking, "How do I rise higher?" and start asking, "Am I truly here? Am I present, right now?" You once searched for the meaning of life, out there, somewhere. Now you sit with a cup of tea, and you know you're alive. You once believed you weren't enough. Now you exhale and realize, I've always been enough, as long as I don't abandon this moment. And when you become truly present, everything changes color. Your voice slows and deepens. Your movements soften and gain depth. Your presence, even in silence, begins to reach others. You no longer talk much about past lives. You stop chasing some great cosmic mission, not because they're wrong, but because you understand. All language is just a bridge. Back to here, where you've always been yourself. You'll still stumble, still feel sadness, still have messy days, but the difference is, you're no longer afraid of them. You've learned how to stay with yourself, even in the falling apart. You no longer need answers, because you're living alongside the question itself. And on a tranquil morning, while washing your hands, folding laundry, or tidying a small corner of your home, you'll smile. Not because anything special happened, but because you've finally returned to yourself. Returned. Gently, intimately, truthfully. Not everyone who reaches this point will remember every word, and that's okay. Because what truly matters isn't in the words, but in what can't be named. that's now quietly blooming inside you. If you felt something gently touch you, subtle, soft, but deep, then maybe. Your soul just nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. A recognition that you've known all of this before. You just forgot. And today, it wasn't someone reminding you. It was you, remembering yourself. From now on, you might see the world just a little differently. A stranger's glance, and you feel their quiet sorrow. A recurring dream wakes you, not in fear, but in still listening. A random sentence hits you, as if it came from a place deeper than words. It's not that you've become enlightened. It's not about achieving anything. It's simply this. You're no longer denying the voice within. You don't need to be certain. You don't need external proof. You only need to be quiet enough to ask, what if I'm not here to learn and retain, but to surrender and remember? The memory of the soul doesn't knock with noise. It arrives as a shiver when no one's touched you, a tear falling before anything hurts, a deep silence, right in the middle of laughter and noise. You don't need to understand this. You only need to trust that feeling growing inside your chest. Maybe I'm not learning something new. Maybe I'm unlocking what I already knew. And maybe, from this moment forward, you'll start choosing to live differently. Speak less, but with depth. Listen more, not to respond, but to understand. Smile slower, but more truthfully. You begin to live to remember, not to prove. You begin to hold silence to touch, not to suppress. You begin to choose stillness, not because you are weak, but because you've grown strong enough to stop performing. There's no need for a closing here, because you know. This journey never truly ends. Every step you take from now on is the next breath in the memory that's slowly unfolding within you. A new chapter, not written with words, but with how present you are with yourself. And if something in this video felt true to you, don't keep it to yourself. Maybe someone on your friend list is waiting to remember. Maybe another soul is quietly longing for one touch to feel less alone. Maybe your share is the first candle lit in a forest. The one that helps someone realize they're not crazy, they're just remembering. If this feels true, just leave one word. I remember, to tell yourself. You've unlocked something real. And if one day you come back to this video, maybe it'll speak to a deeper part of you. Because by then, you will have opened another door within. This video doesn't end with a period, but with an ellipsis, so you can continue without needing me to lead you, because now your soul is quiet enough to guide you on its own. You've remembered. Now it's time to live, as if you never forgot. A soul that has awakened can never see the world the same again. But the real question is, how do we live in a world still asleep, without forgetting what we've remembered? See you in the next video. Living among the unremembering, without losing yourself.